Hi, I'm Odell. They invited me to my sister's promotion party, but forgot my name on the guest list. Again. Then they laughed at my daughter's handmade gift, called me used, and toasted my failures with champagne. But that night didn't end the way they planned. Someone stood up, and when they did, the entire room finally looked at me. What happens when the quiet one stops making room for everyone else? But before we go any further, tell me, have you ever been pushed aside by your own family? Drop it in the comments. I was rinsing out Mira's lunchbox when I heard the mailbox clatter shut. It was past 6. The late Texas sun slid through the blinds, catching the scuffed laminate countertops and turning them into gold. For a moment, I just stood there. Quiet. Ordinary. Mine. Then I saw it, sitting on top of the pizza flyers and window tint coupons. Cream-colored envelope. Silver lettering. The kind of paper only one person in our family used. The kind that doesn't say welcome. The kind that says, know your place. I already knew what it was. Still, I opened it. There it was, bold and tidy in serif font. You're cordially invited to celebrate Callista's promotion to Vice President of Client Experience. And right below, Miss Odilia Shipcar and guest Odilia. They spelled my name wrong, again. Fixing it would have taken one text, one line, but they didn't bother, because to them, I was the mistake. I slid the envelope behind the cereal box, out of Mira's sight. She was still humming in the living room, turning a toilet paper roll into a spaceship. I leaned against the sink, staring down at the linoleum. My name isn't hard to spell. It's just not worth remembering. That's what it said. I went to bed late that night after cleaning up glue-covered popsicle sticks. Told myself it didn't matter. I didn't have to go. Nobody would care if I skipped it. But by morning, guilt was already seated at the breakfast table like it paid rent. Mommy, what's this? Mira held the RSVP card I'd left out. Her fingers smudged the corner. Are we going to Aunt Callie's party? She was 6. She didn't remember the last time. She didn't hear Grandma's toast about raising a kid on expired yogurt. She didn't hear them laugh. She didn't feel the heat of shame that clung to me like secondhand smoke. I guess we are, I said, brushing toast crumbs from her cheek, because I couldn't bear the look she'd give me if I said no. It was always like this, wanting to let go of them, hoping maybe this time someone would look at me and say, I'm glad you came, and mean it. That night, while Mira slept in her fort of stuffed animals, I got a message from my mother. Please don't make this night about you. Smile, be polite. Don't bring up the past. Callista worked hard for this. No, hello, no, how are you? Just instructions. Like I was the problem. Like I was the crack they were desperate to keep from showing. I stared at the screen, her words pushing down on my chest like a weight. I wanted to reply. Ask her if she'd ever wondered why I stopped coming around. I didn't. I just deleted it. Then I pulled the only dress I owned that might pass for formal, hidden at the back of my closet. Safe, neutral, the zipper still broken. I had to wiggle into it and fasten the side with a safety pin. I ironed it anyway, hands shaking, holding it together. In the bathroom behind a closed door, I let the silence fold around me like armor. That's when it hit. The thing I always tried to shove down, the dull, familiar ache of wanting to belong to people who never wanted me back. I sat on the edge of the tub, eyes fixed on the cracked tile near my feet, and cried as quietly as I could. Not because I was sad, not exactly, but because hope, when it gets too small, starts to sting like a splinter you can't quite reach. The next morning, the sunlight poured in earlier than I was ready for. I hadn't really slept. Mira danced into the kitchen, glitter sneakers flashing, tutu layered over her leggings. Surprise! She grinned, holding up a crooked, quarter-folded piece of paper. Inside was a hand-drawn card, stick figures, a pink heart outlined in purple marker. To the best, Mommy, you're my boss. I didn't say anything, just pulled her into a hug and held on a little longer than necessary. She looked up. Can we bring cookies to the party? The ones with sprinkles? Of course we can, I said, even though I already knew where they'd end up. wedged between wine bottles and gift baskets no one actually opens. But she wanted to give. And I wasn't going to teach her that giving only matters if someone claps. We packed them in a small tin. Mira insisted on decorating it with dinosaur stickers, and I tucked it gently in the tote next to some wipes and her favorite book for the drive. As I buckled her into the booster seat, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. Hair tied, back, lipstick faint, eyes a little swollen. "You're not here to be liked," I whispered. "You're here to be kind to her." It's what I told myself. But the truth? I didn't completely believe it, because buried somewhere beneath the rehearsed smile and the layers of silence, I still wanted to be seen. We pulled into a downtown Austin parking garage 20 minutes early. Mira had fallen asleep mid-cookie, her cheeks still sticky with sugar. I found a spot tucked far in the back. No valet tonight, not for us. I nudged her awake. Upstairs, the rooftop was already buzzing, soft jazz floating in the air, champagne flutes clinking. The venue was stunning. Marble surfaces, gold balloon arches, a live quartet playing a slow rendition of Ain't No Mountain High Enough. The sunset hadn't faded yet, casting orange light that bounced off glass panels like frozen fire. Mira twirled in her dress. "Mommy, it looks like a palace," I smiled, adjusting her cardigan. "It's fancy, huh?" She nodded, eyes wide with wonder. We passed the check-in table. A young man in a Bluetooth earpiece barely looked up as he handed me a program. "Just follow the sign for table assignments," he said, without inflection. I moved toward the main tables, 12 circular ones near the stage, each marked with elegant gold placards. Family, executives, close friends, college mentors. I scanned every name card. I wasn't there. A woman in black with a clipboard tapped my shoulder. "Ma'am, you're Odell." I hesitated, then nodded. "Table 14, she said, pointing past the crowd. "Down the walkway, just past catering." She walked off before I could say anything. We moved through a maze of glossy shoes and silk jumpsuits, blazers worn despite the thick heat. I caught fragments of conversation, buzzwords, valuations, someone talking about seed, funding, round 3. Finally, we reached our table. It wasn't on the main deck with the others. It was tucked near a service hallway beside a rolling cart stacked with extra glasses and banquet chairs. A plain white folding table, mismatched from the rest. A printed sign read, "Table 14, overflow. Overflow." It felt like being categorized as miscellaneous. The seats were already half full. A vendor from the lighting crew, someone's spouse, a teenage cousin I didn't recognize, 2 interns still figuring out where to stash their gift bags. I introduced Mira with a soft smile and pulled out her chair. One of the interns leaned toward me. "You with the photographer crew?" I blinked. "No, I'm family." He nodded, polite, disinterested. The kind of nod that doesn't invite follow-up. I reached into my tote and pulled out Mira's gift tin, placing it at the edge of the table. She grabbed a breadstick. "Mommy, when's the cake?" I glanced toward the stage. Staff were wheeling out a projection screen. "Soon, baby," I said, trying to keep my voice level. Across the room, I spotted Callista, center stage, glowing, surrounded. She wore a navy blue jumpsuit that shimmered under the lights. Someone handed her champagne. Her laugh rang out high and clear. Then she saw me. She paused and walked over, poised as always. "Oh, wow," she said, cool as glass. "You came?" "That's unexpected." I didn't bother asking what she meant. I'd been unexpected all my life. Then she turned to Mira. "Hey, sweetie. Still into coloring?" Her voice shifted, overly sweet. Mira nodded. "I made cookies." Before I could say anything, a tall woman in box braids and a tailored pantsuit joined us. "Jasmine," Callista beamed. "Come meet my niece. She's adorable." She rested a hand on Mira's shoulder. There was a pause. Then Callista added like an afterthought, "Oh, and that's her mom." Just that. Not my sister, not Odell. Her mom. Jasmine smiled. "Oh, you work with kids too?" My mouth went dry. Mira tugged at my hand. I nodded once. The lie was easier than trying to explain my family in 30 seconds. That's nice, Jasmine said. Takes patience. I gave a tight smile. Yes, it does. Jasmine turned back to Callista, launching into a story about client onboarding. I slipped out of the conversation like a curtain drawn too far from center stage. Back at table 14, the program began. The screen lit up, playing a slow montage. Callista. On international business trips, at ribbon cuttings, flanked by teams in matching polos. A caption read, "To the women who lead with vision, power, and grace." Mira clapped. I didn't. I stared at the screen. At her name, centered, lit, celebrated. My own name hadn't even made a place card. I looked down at my shoes. The leather cracked at the sides. I'd worn them to interviews, parent-teacher nights, even a funeral once, but never to a place like this. Never to celebrate someone who forgot I helped her rise. Mira tapped my arm. Mommy, are you sad? I looked at her, at those wide, searching eyes. My voice caught. No, baby. I'm just remembering something. A library printer. A worn resume. Template. The night I stayed up past midnight typing bullet points for Callista's first internship application, while she went out drinking with her sorority sisters. No one ever thanked me, not once. A photographer passed by and paused. Could you step aside? I need the sign in the background. I moved. Mira held my hand, and just before I stepped away completely, I whispered under my breath, one day I won't be the one stepping aside. The MC called for attention just as twilight draped itself across the Austin skyline. The last threads of sunlight slipped behind the glass towers, and fairy lights flickered above us like someone had strung them up just to hide how cold this whole gathering really was. The voice through the speakers was confident. Too confident. Tonight, we celebrate the incomparable journey of Callista Vaughn, newly appointed Vice President of Marketing. Polite applause. Mira squeezed my hand, eyes bright. It's her big night, right, Mommy? I nodded, lips drawn, tight. The screen behind the podium lit up. A pre-recorded message from Callista's CEO began to play. He called her a rising force, praised her visionary approach, credited her with transforming outdated systems. I almost laughed. That last part. Because the real transformation began in the cramped bedroom we once shared, when I taught her how to format a resume. How to write a subject line that didn't scream spam, but none of that made it into the slideshow. Then came Callista's manager, late 50s, kept calling her our golden girl. Next, Callista stepped up to the mic. The crowd leaned in. Cameras. Clicked up. I sat straighter. She started smoothly, thanked the company, her team, her mentors. Then she raised her champagne glass. And of course, she said, smiling, polished, I have to acknowledge my older sister. Mira lit up beside me. That's you. My heart thudded. I held my breath. Callista's smile widened. It looked generous. The strongest woman I know, a single mom, resilient, tireless. I sat taller, and clearly unwanted by anyone else. Laughter. A beat of it. Sharp. Unkind. Some gasped, then laughed harder because of the gasp. Others chuckled like it was the cleverest line of the night. A few looked around, unsure if they should be laughing. I didn't move. Couldn't. My hands were locked around the sweating water glass. Mira's smile fell. She turned to me, brows furrowed. Why, are they laughing at you, Mommy? I couldn't answer. My jaw clenched. Every muscle screamed leave, but I didn't. I sat still, frozen at table 14, beside catering bins and ignored interns. Callista moved on like nothing happened. And now the real celebration can begin. More applause. I thought it was over. I prayed. It was over. But then, my mother's voice cut through the rooftop air sharp and clear from the front table. She's a used product, Isolde called out, raising her glass. But hey, still polishes up well. The laughter this time was louder. No hesitation. No confusion. Just joy. I blinked. Mira's lip trembled. She turned away, fingers wrapping around mine like she was holding on to solid ground. I didn't cry. I wanted to, but I didn't. I stared straight ahead, like I was watching a play, one I knew the ending to, one where you sit helpless in your seat while the tragedy unfolds exactly as scripted. No one came. No one said, "That's enough." No. One stopped them, they just laughed. People I'd shared holiday tables with. The ones who used to say, "Family comes first." Now they laughed like I'd been the punchline all along. A glass clinked. Someone introduced the next speaker, but I couldn't hear anything, only the rush of blood in my ears. My heart slamming against my ribs like it wanted out. I looked at Mira, red-eyed, staring at her lap, trying not to cry. I bent toward her. "We're okay," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if it was true. I glanced at Callista. She was already laughing again, with two women I didn't know, halfway through her second glass of champagne. Isolde, still holding court, had her arm looped around some distant cousin who probably thought she was the funniest person in the room. That's when it happened. The shift. Quiet. Internal. Irreversible. For the first time in my life, I thought, not with sadness, not with self-pity, but with cold, steady clarity. This isn't my family anymore. Mira was still cradling the little frame in her lap. She'd spent 2 whole afternoons gluing sequins to the borders, carefully sketching. Callista in marker, high heels, red blazer, what she'd called power hair. She even added a tiny gold crown sticker in the corner. "Because Aunt Callie's like a queen now," she had said, beaming. Now she tugged gently on my arm, the way she always did when she wasn't sure if she was allowed to speak. "Can I give it to her now, Mommy?" I hesitated. A part of me wanted to say no, to protect her from what I already knew was coming, but she was so proud, so hopeful. Saying no would only punish her for her kindness. And she'd already watched me be humiliated tonight, so I nodded. "Go ahead, sweetheart." She lit up, held the wrapped gift in both hands like it was treasure, and skipped toward the front of the room. It took her a moment to weave through the crowd, sidestepping waiters, ducking past a trio of guests laughing over champagne. Finally, she reached Callista, who was standing near the dessert table, chatting with a few people I vaguely recognized from her curated social media life. Mira tapped her aunt's elbow. Callista turned, looked down. "Oh, hi," she said, with a practiced smile, eyes flicking from Mira to the gift. "I made this for you," Mira said proudly. "Congratulations." She held it out like a trophy. Callista didn't reach for it. She tilted her head and smiled. Tight. Distant. The smile she wore when she wanted to seem polite but didn't really care. "Ah, you're sweet," she said, then turned slightly, glancing back at her friends. "But I don't really have a place for handmade stuff in my condo." Very minimalist vibe. She patted Mira's shoulder gently, like returning a puppy to its owner. "Maybe your mom can keep it for you." Silence. Just long enough. A woman next to her muffled a laugh behind her hand. A man cleared his throat and stared into his drink. Mira stood frozen, still holding the gift, then she turned, slowly, smile gone, eyes wide, mouth tight, doing everything she could not to cry in front of strangers. I didn't stand to catch her. I couldn't. I was too busy trying not to come apart. She reached me, climbed into my lap. Her voice cracked. "Did I do something wrong?" I brushed her hair back. "No, baby," I whispered. "You were the only one who did something right." Before I could say more, the mic let out a quick screech and the MC returned to center stage. "Okay, everyone," he chuckled into the microphone. "Let's keep the energy going. Don't worry, real gifts are coming up next, not glitter glue tributes." With each step, I could feel the split seam tug, my body pulling against it like a warning. "You don't belong here." People laughed. Laughed again, this time at my daughter. I didn't look at them. I looked at Mira. She was biting her lip, eyes fixed on the cookie she'd decorated earlier. It sat on a napkin, untouched, like even it had been quietly dismissed. I kissed her forehead and leaned forward just enough to pull her chair closer to mine. The frame sat between us now, silent, delicate, unclaimed. I took a sip of water. My hand shook. From rage, from shame, from holding everything in. They hadn't just made her feel small. They'd taught her, trained her, that being thoughtful was something to be embarrassed about. And the worst part? They thought it was funny. I looked around the room. Callista was back to laughing, sipping champagne with a woman in a white jumpsuit who looked like she'd never made anything with her hands in her life. Isolde was scrolling through her phone, smug like someone who thinks cruelty makes them clever. And the rest, nodding, laughing, complicit. No one stood. No one said, "That's enough." No one offered Mira a kind word, not even a glance. The party just went on. I leaned down and whispered to Mira, "We're going to leave soon." She nodded, pressing the frame to her chest like she didn't want to give it up. I stayed seated for a while longer, silently scanning the room, memorizing the faces, the ones who laughed, the ones who looked away, the ones who would pretend later they didn't hear it. But I heard, and Mira heard, and I wasn't going to forget. I used to think keeping the peace meant staying quiet. But peace isn't humiliation. Peace isn't letting your daughter believe that glitter and kindness are things to be ashamed of. I wrapped my arm around her and whispered to myself, just under the music, beneath the clinking glasses, they're going to learn what happens when you laugh at the wrong person. It was somewhere between Callista's third champagne toast and the fourth round of shrimp crostini that I stood up to. Help Mira grab a napkin. She'd gotten sauce on her fingers and didn't want to lick them in public. She whispered that to me like it was a secret mission. I bent over the buffet table, reaching for the stack of napkins, and I heard it, a rip, sharp, dry, final, a pop from the past. I froze. The zipper, on the side of my dress, the one I'd sewn by hand last winter, split open, right under my ribs. My arm flew to my side, fingers grabbing at fabric like I could hold it together with willpower alone. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I looked around. No one came. Not a single face turned toward me in concern. If anything, a few looked, then turned deliberately away. The kind who never see you until you're unraveling. Then suddenly you're worth watching. Mira noticed. Of course she did. She said nothing. Just slipped off her tiny cardigan and wrapped it around my waist, tied it into a lopsided bow with a shaky little knot. "Now no one will see, Mommy," she whispered. "You still look pretty." That broke me. Not all at once. Not the loud kind of breaking. It was quiet. Slow. The kind of heartbreak that lives behind your eyes. I turned away from her and wiped my face with the inside of my elbow. I didn't want her to see me come apart. Not when she was the one patching me together with buttons and cotton sleeves. We walked back to our table, her hand in mine. My steps slower than before. Not even your clothes want to stay. As we passed through the center of the venue, I glanced up at the massive projection screen mounted on the far wall. A photo loop was playing, Callista at a whiteboard. Callista shaking hands with her CEO. Callista smiling with a group of friends in front of the company banner. Then it appeared, the garage, our parents' old house 10 years ago. The day I helped her rehearse her very first pitch deck. I'd printed every slide, taped them to the wall. I was in sweats, holding a cup of coffee in one hand and a red marker in the other. In the original photo, I stood right beside her, our arms touching. But on the screen, I was cropped out. Neatly, perfectly. As if I'd never been there at all. My throat tightened. Not in surprise, in recognition. They don't just want me quiet, they want me gone. I returned to table 14 and reached for my water glass. My hands were trembling again. Mira had gone back to coloring on her napkin with a pink crayon pulled from her tiny purse. She looked up. "I can tell you don't feel happy here," she said gently. "We can go." I opened my mouth. I wanted to say yes, to grab our things, to walk out and never look back, let them toast to each other's cruelty and call it peace. But then I looked at her, really looked. She was learning something tonight, and if I left now, if I disappeared silently again, what would she carry forward? That kindness means shrinking? That being dismissed means you vanish? I'd already taught her too much about silence, so I stayed, not because I wanted to, but because I needed her to see that sometimes staying is the first step in saying no. I watched Callista give another toast. Laughter swelled again near the champagne bar. My mother sat with a woman in pearls, nodding with the smugness of people who think they have wisdom to share. Mira leaned her head against my arm. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Then I reached for my phone. Opened a message thread I hadn't touched in a long time. Typed something short, simple, direct. Hit send. I slipped the torn seam deeper under the tablecloth and sat straighter. A server walked by with a tray of flutes. Champagne, ma'am? I looked him in the eye. Not tonight, I said. I need a clear mind. He nodded politely and moved on. My voice was even. But my eyes? They'd just remembered who I was. The clink of glassware, the bursts of laughter, the curated hum of corporate praise still filled the rooftop air as I returned to my seat. I folded the napkin across my lap. Not to protect the dress, but to shield the unraveling seam Mira had already tried to mend with her cardigan. My face stayed neutral. But I wasn't listening anymore. Across the room, Arthur Delaney hadn't moved much. While others laughed or raised glasses at Callista's second toast, he stood like a sculpture, still unreadable. His gaze flicked toward the crowd now, and then, but it kept returning to me. When Callista stepped off the makeshift podium, he approached her. Their exchange was quick. 10, maybe 12 seconds. But I saw the shift, the way her shoulders stiffened, the nod that was just a little too tight. The drop in her smile. Whatever he said, it didn't sit well, and he didn't look at her like the others did. With flattery or fear, he looked skeptical. And that told me more than any applause ever could. Mira tugged on my hand. Can we get some air? I said yes because I needed it too. We stepped out onto the balcony. The city stretched beneath us like a glowing map, lights flickering across downtown Austin. Cars moved below, quiet rivers of red and white. Mira leaned against the railing, arms crossed. Why does Aunt Callie get a party for her job? But you? Never did? The question didn't sting. It hollowed. I paused, thought for a second, then said softly, because I used to believe that doing good work was enough. She tilted her head. Is it not? I didn't answer. There wasn't one I could give without betraying all the faith I used to carry. 10 years ago, I was the one who told Callista about Arthur Delaney's hiring round for junior analysts. I was freelancing at a digital campaign firm, barely staying afloat, and ran into him at a networking brunch. Callista had just been laid off. She was spiraling. Slipped her name into conversation, edited her resume that night, prepped her for the interview like it was mine. She got the job. I got a generic thank you card. My name wasn't even in it. After that, she stopped mentioning me at all. And now, here she was, floating through this event like a crowned queen, while I was stitched together in borrowed dignity and wordless restraint. I glanced at Mira. She was twisting a curl around her finger, unaware of how many doors I'd opened for others by quietly handing them the key. Back inside, I took out my phone, opened a message thread I hadn't touched in years. Professor Lattimore. She mentored me in grad school. Went on to chair a board for one of the fastest-growing clean tech funds in the state. Last I heard, she was attending the upcoming Civic Innovation Gala, where Arthur Delaney was slated to speak. I typed, "Hi, Dr. Lattimore. I'd love to reconnect at the Austin Civic Gala if you're still attending. Would be honored to reintroduce myself properly. Warmly, Odell." I hit send. My heart quickened, not from nerves, but from something steadier. Purpose. For the first time all night, I wasn't reacting. I was initiating. Mira looked up as we re-entered. The room. I gave her a small nod. Her shoulders softened, even though she didn't yet know what had just changed inside me. We hadn't taken 3 steps when Arthur glanced in our direction again. This time, I met his gaze. He didn't smile, just gave a subtle, respectful nod. Then he turned back to Callista, who was laughing too loudly at something someone said, and leaned in to whisper. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw what they did. She glanced toward the stage. Then back at him, Arthur gestured toward the mic. Why don't we open it up? The words floated across the room. A few guests turned their heads. One woman clapped slowly, unsure if it was the start of something or just a lull between moments. The why. Room shifted. Not into chaos, into anticipation. Something in the air was changing, not loud, but seismic. Arthur didn't clear his throat. Didn't tap the mic for attention. He just stepped forward. And the room followed, like gravity had quietly realigned itself. I'd like to say a few words, he said, voice even. The kind of smooth that comes from watching someone's story from the very beginning. Polite applause. A few knowing nods. A waiter paused mid-step. Callista's eyes lit up, like she was about to be crowned again. She turned slightly in her chair, elbow resting just so, a poised smile already forming. I didn't move. I just tightened my arm around. Mira, who now leaned fully against me, warm, still. Tonight, Arthur began, we celebrate leadership, vision, achievement. Then he paused. But I want to speak briefly about recognition. He looked out over the crowd, not at the executives, not at the interns, straight at me. There are people in this room who've done more behind the scenes than others have done. On stage, he said, and too often, those contributions go unmentioned. A few heads turned. My mother stopped whispering. Callista shifted in her seat. Just enough. Her shoulders tensed, barely, but enough to crack the surface. Arthur continued. Tonight, we honor one sister, but let's not forget who opened the door in the first place. There it was. No names. But the message landed like thunder. My hands stayed folded in my lap. Mira's grip on me didn't loosen, and I didn't want it to. Then, from the back of the room, a voice rose. Soft, unsure but steady. I'd like to say something too. All heads turned. Leliana, a junior team member from Callista's firm. She stepped forward slowly, hands trembling slightly at her sides. I know this is a celebration, she began, but I just want to acknowledge someone who changed my life. Callista smiled again, assumed it was about her, but Leliana didn't look at her. She looked at me. Miss Shipka helped me during my mental health leave, she said, voice growing firmer. She sent me resources, checked in when no one else did. I was falling apart, and she noticed. Callista started to interject. That's touching, Leliana, but... Leliana didn't even blink. I never got to say this before, she said. But thank you. You didn't know it, but you saved me. And then, for the first time all night, the applause was real. Not polite, not rehearsed, not for Callista. For me. I didn't stand, I didn't bow. I just blinked slowly as the room shifted once more. Not loud, but like something was finally tilting back to balance. Arthur stepped forward again. Some of us work quietly, he said. But the impact isn't smaller, it's just stronger over time. Then he stepped down, and as he passed my table, he leaned in just enough. I have something for you, he said quietly. But not here. I looked up at him, nodded once. Callista wasn't smiling anymore, still seated, but I could see her recalculating, running back through every conversation, trying to trace where it slipped, how the power left her hands. Mira turned to me, her eyes shining. See, she whispered, you didn't need a big party to be seen. I didn't answer. I just reached over, brushed a curl behind her ear, and watched the people who used to shrink me start to shift in their chairs. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't stormed out, I'd stayed, and in that stillness, the ground beneath them had begun to shake. As dessert trays wove between tables and someone dimmed the lights for mood, Arthur leaned toward me. Walk with me, he said. I didn't need to ask where or why. Mira gave my hand a gentle squeeze. I nodded to her. I'll be right back, baby. Sit tight. I followed Arthur out of the ballroom, into the long hallway lined with sconces and photos from past corporate galas. The click of my low heels echoed louder than expected. For a moment, I just breathed, clean air, away from the smell of champagne and self-congratulation. Then, halfway down the corridor, a sharp heel strike behind us. Of course. Callista, I said under my breath. She stepped between Arthur and me like she owned the path. What exactly are you doing? She snapped. You've made your point. Don't embarrass yourself further. Arthur stayed calm. Measured. I'm giving credit, he said, where it's long overdue. Callista scoffed. You always act like she's this quiet genius. Callista snapped. She's just someone who couldn't cut it in the real world, so she clung to the idea of being the kind one. I stared at her. Not with rage, but with something sharper. Stillness. No, I said evenly. I just stopped pretending that silence equals dignity. I chose to live with intention. You chose applause. She blinked, just once. But it was enough. Enough. To know I'd finally said something she couldn't flip. Arthur gestured gently toward a nearby bench. This won't take long. He handed me a small, flat box about the size of a paperback. Your daughter left this on the main table, he said. I figured it wasn't meant to get lost. I opened it slowly. Inside was Mira's cardboard frame, slightly bent now, the drawing of Aunt Callie still centered, smudged with glitter glue, but tucked behind it, something else, a folded document. Thick paper. Arthur said nothing. Just watched. I unfolded it. An official letter. An offer. From a national nonprofit. Arthur sat on the board. They were launching a mentorship division focused on resilience in overlooked voices, and they wanted me to lead the pilot program. We need people who know how to endure, Arthur said, but more importantly, people who know how to rebuild. I looked down at Mira's frame. It didn't matter that the job was prestigious. What hit me was that this little gift, rejected earlier like it meant nothing, was now carrying the weight of something far bigger. I held it to my chest and nodded. Thank you. Don't thank me, Arthur said. Just take what's already yours. We walked back toward the ballroom. Inside, the slideshow was looping again. But this time, something had changed. Someone, Arthur, maybe, or someone who had quietly noticed, had swapped out one of the centerpiece images. There we were. 10 years ago. The blurry garage photo. Callista mid-pitch me, beside her, whiteboard marker in hand, coaching her through the opening. No one had ever shown that photo publicly until now. And beneath it, a new caption. The real beginning. Guests turned to the screen, then slowly toward our table. Conversations fell quiet. Isolde looked like someone had shut off her oxygen. Callista stood frozen. Half a breath from speaking, but with nowhere left to point the story. No spotlight, just consequence. I returned to table 14. Mira hopped down from her chair. You ready? I asked. She nodded, slipped her small hand into mine. I turned to the nearest staffer. Thank you for helping tonight. You've all been wonderful. Then I glanced toward my mother. You don't have to say anything, I said gently. I already stopped listening. I didn't wait for a reply. Callista stood rigid as I passed, arms crossed tight over her chest like she was trying to hold in a storm. You'll always have the room, I said. But I have what matters. We walked toward the exit. Arthur nodded from near the bar, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. At the threshold, Mira clutched the frame tighter and whispered, Next time, I want to make 2 of these. I smiled, not just with my mouth, but from somewhere deeper, deeper than pride. There won't need to be a next time, baby, I said. This was the last lesson. The venue lights faded behind us as the car cut through the velvet dark. The road home was mostly empty. long stretches of soft lamplight flickering across the windshield. Mira was asleep in the back seat, her head tilted slightly, still holding the cardboard frame like it was treasure. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. The dashboard glow lit her face. She was safe. She was enough. And I was finally enough for myself. There were no apologies. As we left, no one chased after us with trembling hands or hushed regret. No one stopped us to say, I was wrong. But that silence, it didn't feel like erasure anymore. It felt like release. For so long, I'd been gaslit into believing that closure had to come wrapped in someone else's regret. But tonight, I realized it didn't. I used to wait for their sorry like it was oxygen, I whispered aloud, though no one was awake to hear it. And now I'm breathing just fine without it. By the time we reached our small home in Round Rock, the moon had slid halfway across the sky. I parked, turned off the engine, and just sat there. I didn't rush to carry Mira inside. I watched her sleep. Gently, peacefully, like she knew we'd walked through something big. Inside, I placed the cardboard frame on the bookshelf in the living room, not behind books. Not tucked in a drawer like before. Centered. That small, glitter-smudged thing they once mocked, now reframed, wasn't just a child's craft. It was proof. Of love, of voice, of everything we were told didn't count. My phone buzzed, Eleliana's name lit up the screen. I hope you know you started something tonight, no punctuation. Just that, I replied with a single heart. Then I pulled out the folded offer letter from Arthur. I'd read it twice at the venue, but I hadn't really seen it. This time I circled the start date with a blue pen, drew a small star beside it, and tucked it into my kitchen drawer, on top of the bills. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, I dozed off on the couch. Mira had crawled onto my chest at some point in the night, her breath slow and steady against my collarbone. In the morning, the sun spilled into the kitchen, not dramatic, just soft, like a reset. I was already up when Mira rubbed her eyes and wandered in. Are we going back to Aunt Callie's again today? She asked, voice sleepy. I turned from the coffee pot, knelt beside her. No, sweetheart, I said, brushing a curl from her forehead. Next time we're going somewhere better. Like Disneyland? I laughed, really laughed. For the first time in weeks, something even better. A place where we don't have to shrink. She grinned, satisfied. I handed her a bowl of cereal, poured my coffee, and we sat at the small table. Just the two of us. Quiet, present, no applause, no slideshow. No catered pastries, just the ordinary warmth of a morning that finally belonged to us. After breakfast, I walked her to school. She waved 3 times to the same teacher. I waved too. Then I kept walking, around the corner to a little cafe I used to hide in during my loneliest years. But today, I didn't sit in the back. I opened my laptop at a window seat, ordered a black coffee, and typed the subject line for a new proposal draft. Rewriting the blueprint. When resilience speaks first, I paused. Looked out at the slow city traffic, the teenagers waiting for the bus, the barista dancing as he restocked cups behind the counter. And then I heard my own voice in my head, soft but unshaken. For years, I let them define me, the failure, the burden, the invisible one. But the truth? They only saw what made them comfortable, not what made me real. And now they don't get to look away anymore. I closed my laptop, stood tall, and walked toward my next meeting, my real one, not in a boardroom, but in the life I'd been trying to build between the cracks. As the door swung open and sunlight hit my face, I thought of Mira's words. You didn't need a big party to be seen, and maybe, for the first time ever, I believed it. Sometimes the people who should know your worth are the last to see it, and by then, you've already moved on. You don't need applause to prove you mattered. You don't need a mic to reclaim your story. Have you ever been the one they tried to silence, only to rise anyway? If this story spoke to you, don't forget to subscribe for more real, powerful family drama that cuts deep and heals wide.